A very big thank you to Holden and the entire crew here at Silent Zoo for letting us come back. So, yes. And thank you to all of you guys getting up a little early today and everything, and we swear we'll get you out by noon. I want to say a big thank you to Alan Dahl, who's been doing all our graphics from year one. You can see all of our 15 years back there if you want to take a quick look. Thank you, Daniel Schweiger, who's hosted more than anyone through our 15 years. Edwin, absolutely. My spouse, Edwin Windler, who's put up with me for the past week of trying to organize this, so thank you. I think I'm still married. Dale Turner, as always, thank you for helping with the raffles. Henry and Nancy for helping get everybody in and get your name badges and all that. They've been helping us from almost day one. Gareth Hughes, thank you so much for a little monetary donation. Thank you on that. And another thank you to Aldo Shilaku, my client, who in your bag you'll see there's a Comeback Trail promo. It was a digital-only release, so thank you, Aldo. Thank you to Amoeba Music for the goodie bags, and Trotter Records for the great CDs, La La Land Records for the great CDs, Walt Disney Company for helping us with the Jim Henson poster for Dave Fleming, because there's no CD or vinyl.
Not my fault.
Thank you, Marshall Harvey. That's where our party's at tonight. George Shaw, you got some great promos in there from him. Also, William Ross, thank you, thank you, thank you. And just being up here 15 times, and I never thought I could get 5 composers to come the first year, and now we just keep doing this, and people are flying in all over the world just to meet you people. You know, I always say, it's one thing when the suits say they like your music, it's another thing when people who are actually buying it and streaming it, like these people know your music, you know, so congratulations to you guys. We've lost a few people through the years. Daniel Licht, composer, Ken Thorne, a couple fans of film music, friends used to come, Craig Rogers and Bill Bigley, so, you know, we wish they were here, but we're gonna have fun because we know they'd want us to. So, Daniel, take it away.
All right, this is streaming. So live from Glendale, it's Fans of Film Music 15. Well, it's been 15 years since I emceed the very first one of these at Dark Delicacies, and I'm thankful to Peter Hackman to have me back to moderate this at Silent Zoo Studios, where we honor the enduring art of composing and the fans who appreciate it. Now let me introduce our guests. Now, David Fleming got his composing start working with Otley Orverson on such scores as Season of the Witch and the Eagle, before segueing to Hans Zimmer on such projects as The Lion King, Dune, and Top Gun Maverick. David teamed with Gustavo Santaolalla on the acclaimed HBO adaptation of The Last of Us, as well as scoring my new favorite girl-powered dragon fantasy, Damsel, on Netflix. This year, David's also gotten 2 Emmy nominations for Amazon's spin on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and an Emmy win for Disney Plus's documentary, Jim Henson, The Idea Man. Let's welcome a composer who knows not to feed the mutant plants, David Fleming. Now, a protege of James Newton Howard, John Frizzell got his career off to an explosive start with Dante's Peak while making us laugh at the comic Armageddon of Mike Judge. In nearly 100 scores, he's excelled with Horror and 13 Ghosts and The Following, created the memorably melodic legend of James Dean, grooved with the cult hit of Josie and the Pussycats, and conquered the galaxy in between Alien Resurrection, Space Force, and Beavis and Butthead Do the Universe. Let's welcome the composer who makes Cornholio rule supreme, John Frizzell. Now, when you want brilliant comedic quirkiness, the composer to call with every instrument imaginable in a singularly distinctive style is Rolf Kent. Ranging from African rhythms to lush classical orchestras and an Indian beat to swear by, some of Rolf's memorable scores include Election, Sideways, Up in the Air, About Schmidt, Mean Girls, and Legally Blonde, all while playing the memorable drama of Labor Day and Charlie St. Cloud. Here's the reason why there is no Merlot served at this event, Rolf Kent. Now, superheroes in the apocalypse are often John Pisano's jam, scoring the dystopian Maze Runner trilogy while providing much of the music for Netflix's Marvelverse, along with memorable video game soundtracks for both Spider-Man and Miles Morales, along with Amazon Prime's Invincible. John Pisano's epic scoring talent has now conquered the kingdom of the Planet of the Apes with a human hunt that Jerry Goldsmith would be proud of. Let's hail Caesar and John Pisano. Now, a veritable one-man wrecking crew when it comes to great session work and film composition, as well as being a founding member of the Blues Brothers, all while playing for the likes of the Carpenters, Neil Diamond, and French Connection composer Don Ellis. Tom Sachs' work made Bernard Herrmann's Oscar-nominated theme for Taxi Driver iconic. He's played winds on Blade Runner, the sax for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and the clarinet of Pleasantville. As a composer, just some of Tom's credits include Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, Beretta, Stir Crazy, The Sure Thing, and the new documentary Blake Edwards, A Love Story in 24 Frames. Let's give it up for Tom Scott. Yeah. So before I turn it over to you guys, I'm going to get one question and a piece for our great composers. And David, I'm going to start with you. Now, the Emmys, and I particularly loved your documentary score for Jim Henson, The Idea Man on Disney+. What did Jim Henson mean to you growing up, and how do you musically capture an almost spiritual kind of creativity?
Oh, man. I mean, I think someone asked me, like, why I would be qualified to do that score, and I was like, I think everyone feels like they could be qualified to do that because his creations have meant something to every single person, and there's so many generations of it as well. For me personally, definitely Sesame Street. Like, I think I was borderline brainwashed with Sesame Street. I said that around Brian Henson. I was like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. It's a good brainwashing, you know. What Ron Howard wanted to do with every department, not just music, is to have the film sort of capture the spirit of Jim, which is kind of multifaceted because he was obviously prolific and super driven in a very like playful way, very curious way, but also had this really sort of quiet energy at the center of it, which is strange. Usually with these biopics, it's like people are driven in sort of an aggressive kind of conquering way, and he just came from such a different place. So musically, it was really about like tying into when are we capturing this nonstop drive of curiosity, and when are we sort of focusing on who he was, which was sort of this quiet, very kind person at the center of all of this. And it made it fun, and it was, it was an excuse to be like as colorful as possible, and there were a lot of instruments or percussion sounds that normally you'd be embarrassed to show a director. That's too silly. Anytime there was something silly, Ron loved it. What's that? That's great. No, that's a trash can. We weren't planning on putting that in the mix. But so yeah, it was really about embracing, what would Jim do at every level.
Thank you. Now, John, I think my favorite collaboration of yours is with Mike Judge. You've done Office Space, King of the Hill, Beavis and Butthead, and you also play in a band together. I mean, what's it like to work with a satirist who has predicted the future as well as The Simpsons?
Meeting Mike and becoming very good friends and sharing music together. You're right, yeah. So playing bluegrass together and doing all these things. It's a wonderful gift to get to work with a friend and to work with characters that I feel so close to. We're rebooting King of the Hill right now, and so bringing everybody back to life and considering where I think everyone knows now that there's a 15-year gap between, so the characters are older. And so that's been sort of what I've been deep into right now. So how have they changed, but how are they the same? And talking about this with Mike, we're continuing on Beavis, and it seems like it just gets better, and the world is giving us so many great opportunities to express stupidity. It's hard to fathom that I could be. It's almost Panglossian, the level of gifts that our current culture is giving us to look at. So yeah, no, it's a good time for satire. Very good.
Now, Ralph, you have a truly amazing collection of instruments from across the world, and you could truly say that you changed the sound of comedy scoring with them. How did you kind of hit on this world music comedy approach?
Oh, I have no idea. And also at this point, everybody, all of us, have an insane amount of instruments or sounds available to us. So, I think there was a window during which bringing in, a sitar for no good reason other than you liked the sound of it was an interesting thing to do. I think now everyone's got sitars and everyone's embraced everything. So I think I think that's now it's almost. I mean, it used to be that to create an interesting oral texture, it was interesting to explore different sounds and do different things, and it's always interesting to sort of do that. But there came a saturation point where world music was just, there was so much world music that it was just blur. You just go, yeah, another sitar or whatever, or Ahu. So I think that sort of the manner of engaging with those sounds has changed. But at the time, it was just a thing I was really interested in doing. I mean, I love the sound of the Ahu. So I think my first experience with Ahu was actually not an Ahu. It was me playing a violin and then filtering it so it sounded, it just really changed the sound of it. And it was really because I loved sounds that bend. So whether it's a harmonica going, wow, which is obviously a very Morricone, but lots of other, it's just a glorious sound. Saxophones bend.
No, I don't bend, ever.
And Ahus are all about the gliss, all about the slide. And it captures your attention. The slide in music, it's like the human voice. It focuses you on that thing. And so I think that was always an interesting element or sort of sound quality to throw in. Still is. But why that and comedy mesh, I don't know. There are, yeah, I don't know. It was, and also, I didn't set out to be a comedy composer. I just happily landed in a place where the films were intelligent, and the intelligent films were quite frequently comedies. So I was very happy to be there.
Well, we're very happy too. Now, John, you have scored any number of classic comic book heroes, from Daredevil to Spider-Man to Invincible, and now the Liberator of the Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. What's it like to capture this particular genre of characters?
Geez, I mean, I think the hardest thing about it is there's so much of it, and there's a long history of it, and with that long history, there's been so many musical ideas that have invaded that space and that we've been influenced by. And I think the trickiest thing about it is, wanting to do your own thing, but at the same time too, wanting to honor what the fan base wants as well, and there's, you go into these projects and you always have these grand ideas of, I mean, obviously depending on the studio and director and different ideas and opinions that kind of invade the process. You go on these projects always wanting to kind of do your own thing and wanting to make your mark, as a composer. But you have to really be these properties in our lives for so long is because they're so beloved. And listen, if the fans didn't show up and the fans didn't like them, we would stop making them. Hollywood's not making these things because they love making comic book movies. They love making these movies because the fans love them and because they're usually, massive hits. So as a composer, you have to as a film composer, you have to weigh all these options when you come into these projects. And I was always a fan of all this music before I could write a note of it. I'm somewhat of an odd case because I got into film music because When I was coming up, this was an odd thing. It's not odd anymore, but I wanted to be a film composer. Most composers that I kind of came up, worked for, they kind of fell into film scoring. They necessarily didn't set out to be a film composer, but they kind of, they were in a band, and I use this analogy, the touring dried up, and then they said, I have a buddy who directs a commercial, and I'm going to score, and they kind of like Forrest Gump themselves into film scoring. I always, I kind of came up in the era in the 80s when film scoring was starting to kind of become a thing. It was actually, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and my family said, "What do you want to do? Like, this is nuts. Like this is is that a real job? It was now. I mean, there's college courses on it. Things like that. I mean, there's so much exposure to film composers now. But when I was coming up, it was a very, very isolated, odd thing. So it's just it's become one of those things where you really kind of, back to your original question, you really got to make sure that that you do your own thing, but at the same time too, you have to be conscious, like I said, of all these other things. And I think that's kind of been the most challenging part, I think, of working in that genre, is that balancing act between those two things.
Wow. Thanks, John. Now, Tom, you have a legendary career as both a session player and a film composer. Now, what's it like for you moving between both of those musical worlds, and how does one encourage the other?
I always say, look, I'm 76 years old, and I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. I know it has something to do with music. I had a couple of things to say. You talked about bending. Billy May, if you don't know, is a great, great composer and famous arranger for Sinatra and everybody back in the day, 50s and 60s. He used to often write the saxophones where they go, huh? And he said, I like that. It sounds like the saxes are retching. I also wanted to talk about a little bit about Lionel Newman, because when I did Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which is the fifth, I think, in the original series, I believe. Fourth, fifth? Fourth? Is that right? Okay. Because John did the first one. Leonard Rosenberg the second, then Jerry did the third one, and then that fourth one was mine? Okay. It was like, I was 23 or 24, it was a long time ago. But Lionel Newman was the head of the studio at that time. You guys missed an era where the studios really, really had what they said. It didn't even matter what the producer said. In fact, I saw Lionel Newman one day. I was on a session for somebody over there at Fox, and the director was like not happy with something that was going on with the music. And Lionel said, "Get out of here," and he did. Because in those days, he was Fox. He was the music representative for Fox. Whatever he said went, and if it meant throwing out a director, fine, out. He also said one time of Jerry Goldsmith, he said, we had to install a reflecting pool just right by the podium so he could admire himself from time to time. God, he was funny. So look, as far as bridging the gap between playing, it's just fun. It's fun doing all of it, And I did well as an instrumentalist and got to see. I remember right in the very beginning of my recording career, I was sitting next to guys like Bud Shank and Ted Nash, and these great, great players of those days. And look, my attitude, especially flute, I was not yet a real accomplished flute player, although I became one. But I would sit next to Bud Shank, who was an unbelievable flute player with a liquid sound, beautiful. So I would just have this ear completely to just do what Bud does. You'll be fine. Just play along. And I kind of, it was sort of an earn while you learn sort of thing. But and the same with writing. As we all know, you've got a project. You've got to write notes. Let's see. Everything in the universe is possible. Now, how do we focus in on something a little more specific? And it's always challenging, but it's always great fun. And you've got to just, let your mind run free, and then try to. on those good days when you can just hear stuff. I don't think it comes from me, honest. A lot of it comes from, well, it's a combination of everything I've ever learned and heard, and just the stars are aligned. You know, it's inspiration, and it kind of comes through me on the good days. And that's true with playing and composing, writing, doing solos too. It's like I've had, how many times have I done this? You know, according to AllMusic.com, I played on over 2,000 recordings. That sounds impossible to me, even to me. But I suppose over 55 years since I've been doing it, I suppose that if you do the math, that's possible. But anyway, look, I just enjoy all of it.
Thank you, Tom. So I want to turn the questions over to you. I ask a favor if you can ask one question per one composer as opposed to everybody. That way we get the most questions in. So let's get started. Who's got a question?
Okay, good night.
Okay, you, sir?
Yes, sir.
So music flows through you, but what have you picked up from the world around you? And I don't know where you I mean, you're playing multiple instruments, so you play the flute and the saxophone.
Clarinet, too. That was my first.
Yeah.
So,
Besides the people that you admired, who are where else in the world that surrounds you have you picked up the force of music that you've put into your effort?
look, if I liked it, I want to know more about it. I used to stand, I guess, at the big Altec Lansing corner speaker that my parents had, and play, I think it was Boulez's version of Rites of Spring, and sit there with a score and watch it and conduct to it, and just try to figure out what the hell he was doing. It was like unbelievable, the way he mixed all these sounds together in this. I think it still, Rites of Spring probably still stands as one of the, if not the greatest piece of 20th century music ever written. I think you could make that case. So if I like this, I was always curious. I always and I would go to the piano and try to fish out harmonies that I heard. I just had this desire to know the insides of music, and even on sessions, I would be listening to what's the strings doing, what are the violas doing, and I got to work for such great people like Michel Legrand and Quincy Jones and Patrick Williams and Dave Grusin and all these great people. And boy, what a great way to improve your music education, just listening to their scores as you're recording them.
Oh. Next question, sir.
Question for Rolf Kent. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how you came about creating the sound for Sideways, such an iconic and memorable sounding score, and such a wonderful.
Sure. By the way, I just wanted to say how much I like the. If I liked it, I wanted to know more about it. It's so my speed. I once was seeing some Vietnamese orchestra playing, and there was the Dan Bao there, but I didn't know what it was. I just went, "There's a blues one-string instrument in there. What the hell is it?" And I kept on staring at the screen, trying to see enough of the instrument that I'd be able to figure out what it was. And then I managed to get one in Monterey Park. Sideways. Yeah, that was really intimidating. So, because Alexander, the director, wanted, he liked the score by Pietro Umiliani, is that right? Got his name right? With Chet Baker. And he was going, that kind of jazz. And I'm going, wait a minute, you're talking to me. But I eventually figured out a way of, because then I tried to sort of just facsimilate that sound. And then he came back to me and went, yeah, but it doesn't sound like you. And so I then went, oh, great. So I then, to get that sound, because it's jazz. And I had the great, Alexander Payne liked this idea that we would take the music to the studio, we would rehearse it with as if to picture, and then stop playing it to picture. And he said, just play it as music. And then, so basically the first time round with all those pieces of music was written, and people would play the charts. And then we'd just go, okay, can you make it, piano a bit more Latin, drums a little looser, and then, so we'd pull away from the page, but using it as the sort of starting point. And so it become more, more organic, more fluid, more energetic. And, it's one of the great things. I mean, I'm always electrified when having a jazz ensemble, is because everyone has to play together, obviously. Unlike an orchestra where you can break up sections if you're using a click or something. But with jazz, everyone's listening, and everyone's sort of adjusting and filling in the blanks, and so there are never any blanks. There's just an electricity, and it can be super minimal. And yet, there's this thread of connection going through the music, and it's absolutely a blissful thing to be doing. And so, yeah, that was essentially it. I had my tunes, I had my charts, but when it came to actually recording it, it was mostly done in that fairly organic way.
Big anniversary year for Sideways. Thank you. Peter?
I have a question for John Frizzell. I love your James Dean score. I'm from Indiana. Can you tell me anything interesting about working on that or anything at all?
Oh, thank you. I found Mark Rydell. Mark's alive. Mark is, I think, 96, 97. Spoke to him about 2 months ago, and we had a pretty good conversation. It is one of my favorite things I've written. It was a I think emotionally, it was a strange experience. I had both my parents die a couple months before I started writing it in a 2-week period. I lost my mom and then my dad. And Rydell had the nerve to call me up, and he goes, "Really sorry what happened to you, kid. Can you put that in my movie?" And I thought, well, what an audacious thing. He said, yeah, but he goes, you'll probably heal from it. You'll probably grieve through it. And because it's really a father-son story, that film, about that Michael Moriarty's character really shapes Dean into who he became as an actor. Rydell was roommates with James Dean, so he was very intimately involved. And it was fascinating to sit and have those conversations, and James Franco there too, where we would really try to get to the core of what emotionally drove his acting. So thank you. Yeah, it's a.
I wish it was released.
I know. I think you can. Can you stream it somewhere now? Anyway, someone should look around for it. Yeah.
Beautiful film. Question? You, sir? Or you missed, I'm sorry. You had a question?
For John Faisano?
Yep.
How do you approach scoring for a video game? And is it different in any way from a movie?
It was funny. We were all just talking about that. What's really interesting about video games that I found really fascinating, because when I got into the business, I kind of came up more through an old school, quote unquote, production traditional way of how we score films. It wasn't necessarily like these days with all the digital tools that we have at our fingertips. It's so easy for composers to get the video, put it in a timeline, put all the markers up, set their tempos exactly to hit every single little moment, super frame accurate. And then you go back to how films were scored in the 70s and 80s. It was a much different process. It wasn't so, everything wasn't done directly to picture. Themes were developed. Then when the themes were developed, then you would have conversations with the director and talk about how you want to develop those themes. And picture is not even involved at this point. You are literally writing music for a film that you more or less haven't seen a lot of at this moment. So a lot of scores were done that way. And in an odd way, video games, which are so technically advanced, we score them the same way that we would score films back in the 70s and 80s. We don't have picture. We don't have gameplay that we're writing to. We have conversations with directors. We have artwork that we're looking at. We have the script and the story. And that's why I think video games are very, if you notice, a lot of game music is very theme-centric. Video game music is very thematic. It's, and it's kind of it's not a knock on modern film scoring, because there are plenty of film scores today that are so thematic, but you can't really hum them. But if I heard, if I heard of the score, I would say, oh, that's this, So it's not that scores are less thematic now than they used to be. It's just it's just the way that the films have developed and scores have developed over time. And it's always cyclical, we go in these periods of time where scores are very thematic, and then we go through these periods of times where they're more atmospheric, and you kind of go back and through history of film scoring. But video game music, I think the reason why they are so thematic is because a lot of times composers, when they start on these games, they are filling in the blanks with music. And so the films and the scores tend to be very colorful and very, I'm big into writing suites. So before I do any film, before I look at a lick of picture, before I write a big suite, and a lot of composers do it. It's kind of a tool that I think a lot of composers do. But it's also a very old school way of approaching a project, by writing these big, boisterous, very colorful thematic suites. And I always refer to them as a fashion show. You see these fashion shows and you see these models and they're wearing these crazy outfits with these, huge sleeves. And you're like, who in the hell is going to wear that on the street? And then you realize by the time that concept hits the rack, it's toned down and the sleeves are smaller and it's more functional, and that's kind of what these suites are. These suites are these big, crazy ideas that are very colorful and lots of stuff going on. I mean, you present them to the directors and they love them because they can close their eyes and they see their movie and they see their edit in it. But then you take that suite and you try to throw it in the film right away. Whoa, this is not, what's going on here? This is too much, at least in my experience. And so video game music is very much like that, but a lot of times those suites make it into the game because, you're kind of you have a lot more freedom in that world than you do with live, especially live. When you get to animation, it kind of gets a little bit closer to that video game world, but yeah, the game music is really interesting. I found that the writing process for video game music more mimics how film scoring, let's say, was done from a production standpoint, 30, 40 years ago. So I don't know if that answers the question.
And you, sir.
Good morning, and I just want to thank Peter for putting us on, and thank you all for being here with us this morning. It's a treat. And my question is also for Mr. John Paisano. You mentioned, wanting to film score.
Yeah.
And it is kind of a niche thing. I remember being a little kid, and I was listening to my mother's record album of Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Sure.
And The Empire Strikes Back, like on repeat.
Yeah.
Like, don't you want to listen to Barbra Streisand? As I got older, it wasn't until I saw like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in the theater, and I noticed music's by John Williams, and I'm like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, who is this guy? He's everywhere. and I would do like what I call musical sharing. Like, you've got to listen to this. Oh my God, it's amazing. Like, I wept when we lost Mr. Horner. Like, I don't know him.
Yeah.
I never got to meet him. Like, I'm getting to see you guys this morning. I cried when he passed because of that. Like, I guess through the music, like
Sure.
emotional connection. His music was so dramatic and emotional, even when it was like a low-budget cartoon. Like, it was amazing.
Your question?
And so, I'm sorry. My question is, like, who was it that inspired you, where you said, I want to do this?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned. John Williams was my poison. I mean, that immediately polluted my mind and said, "This is what I want to do." I grew up with a lot of the same ideas, and I say this a lot. But when I was growing up, we didn't have films weren't merchandised like they were today. I mean, of course, Star Wars was kind of like the beginning where you could buy action figures and all this stuff. But a lot of films, I would go and see them in the theater, and I could go home and I couldn't jump on the internet and look more things up. I'd like to keep reliving that film experience. I had to wait a year and a half before it hit a VHS tape, right before you get it. But the one thing you could get was the score, right? You could buy the soundtrack. There wasn't, the artwork of Empire of the Sun, or the visual effects behind the Empire of the Sun. They eventually came out with stuff like that years later. But if you wanted to relive that film again, if you wanted to, re-experience it again, the only thing you really could buy was the soundtrack. That was your choice. You could go to the theater, and then you could buy the soundtrack. And before I could play a lick of music, that's what I did. I consider myself more of a film person than a music person in a weird way, but movies got me into music. Music didn't get me into movies. You know what I mean? I was never interested in music until I saw movies. And I saw Empire of the Sun. That was the movie that I saw. I was 9 years old when I saw it, and I love that movie so much. It just really, really resonated with me. And I said, oh, what else can I get? Okay, I think my father bought me the soundtrack for Empire of the Sun, and I just lived. I could close my eyes and listen to Imaginary Air Battle and see Christian Bale in the cockpit of the Zero and flying around, and Williams' music soaring, and I could just relive that film over and over again. I just listened to it all the time, and then the film finally came out on VHS, and it was like, I don't need to see it anymore. I've seen it 1,000 times in my head, and so that was it for me, and that's what soundtracks did for me, and that's why I go, okay, well, what do I have to do to get into this? How do I create this? And I've still never been able to do it. John Williams is a tough barrier to kind of get into the business on, but it drove me to kind of, I love that magic trick. I love the magic trick of being able to create music to where you could close the eyes and visualize that experience you had in the theater. And yeah, that was a big one. That was a big one for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Over there, I'm sorry. You, sir. Yeah.
What's the process of allocating when you're working with other composers on the same project, like for The Last of Us? How do you allocate the work between two people?
Well, that's very project dependent, and I would say Last of Us was the most specific in that term because Gustavo had created the music for the video game, and when they created the show, I think one of the things that was really successful about this show was they really embraced the video game. I think forever, when Hollywood would sort of adapt a video game, they kind of throw it out and say, well, we know how to do this, and usually backfired. But I think with Last of Us, they were smart about trying to keep what worked, which was quite a lot. And Gustavo specifically, he's like we were talking before about like, film composing, and what we do is often a craft, and you're bending your skills to fit something. And Gustavo is more like, when I was growing up, listening to recording artists, what you think of as like an artist or artiste, it's like this is what I do. This is what I've made for this show, for this video game, and he made this really beautiful music. But I think he also is open about like what he doesn't do, and what doesn't fit his art. And I think on the video game, for instance, you had Mac Quayle come in and do a lot of action and tension music, and for the most part, that was my assignment with the show as well. I would say for me it was a little more specific because a lot of if you think about when you play a game, it's loop-based music. It's active. It's based on what the player's doing. And now for the show, for the first time, there is a set sequence of events that happens in a set piece. So it was a bit of like trying to figure out how to make their world work for this different medium, which was a passive medium, but make it feel active. So that's Last of Us. Then when there's I've done a lot of co-composing with other people, with Hans, for instance, and that. It really always is project dependent. There's no one easy answer on that. Hopefully, if you have something where you just get a blank slate and you're like, how do we tackle this? Hopefully, usually there's like scenes or themes that call out to you, and you say, oh, I want to do this. I want to do this. Hopefully, that's the best way it works, where you just go after what calls to you. And then sometimes there's like on Blue Planet, I remember there's just the same scene is obviously calling to everyone. Everyone wants to do it, and then you just have to draw straws, I guess, and make it work.
Thank you. Marcus?
You got to work with the legend Michael Jackson. What was that like to perform on probably one of the most legendary songs of all time, Billie Jean? What was it like to be with that guy?
It was legendary. No, okay, so here's what happened. I am not in the credits of Thriller, because if they listed everyone who had participated in any, it would be the telephone book, because I was one of those people who was brought in at the last minute to provide some, what we used to call ear candy for that tune. So I came in the studio, God, I can't remember, it was on Beverly, and, no, it wasn't, oh, maybe, I don't remember, anyway. So I did meet Michael for a moment. He came out, and shook his hand, and I still remember this. His handshake was so light, you know, like that I thought I could probably go, and this guy to go. This is not in any. I'm just kidding. This is in no way meant to detract from his enormous talent and what he gave us in terms of the pop music world. However, I have. Basically 2 or 3 licks that I played on Billie Jean. Now, the chorus goes, Billie Jean, that's one. And the other one I remember is like it's going do 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 2, 3 da 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 da. Bingo, in and out. So that was my experience on what became one of the iconic pop records of all time, I must say. And as they say, I'm just happy to be involved in any way, shape, or form.
Rolf, I love Dexter, main title.
Oh.
Can you tell us a story on that or something? That experience will be all about something else.
Yeah, I mean, God, I love Dexter. It was 2 weeks of work, and it's probably the best known thing I've ever done. And which is, you know, there's that irony, but I mean, essentially, they had episode 1, and they wanted a title sequence, and they wanted it twisted, but ironic and humorous, but still dark. And I came up with 2 versions, and one was just sort of straight 4/4. One had more of a swing thing, and they went, "We like the tune for the 4/4 one, but we'd like it to swing." Like it did. And I go, "But you can you?" And then, you know, so that's what I did. So, and then I think, you know, I played all the things on it, and it was just stacking lots of. I think there's charango, there's saz, there's obviously guitars and ukuleles and things in there. And you know, sometimes I struggle thinking, you know, for a lead instrument, you just go, what is your lead tune if it's like this is the focus? And so anyway, I think I just sort of stacked things and then sort of worked around to figure out what the melody was really coming from. And then of course there's those sort of growling trombones and things, which just were very much the sort of 3rd tier of things that went into it to just sort of like make it do things. Oh, and then the other thing was I very carefully put little bell hits on the drops of sauce/blood, and then they re-edited the image so that it was they didn't mesh. And I was going, all right, whatever you want. But anyway, that was it. That was great. It was also right around the same time as I did a movie called Reign Over Me, which was Reign Over Me was. I dreaded that they wanted the pizzicato approach to comedy because I'd done that a lot, and it's a great tool, but I just didn't want to do it all the time. And so Reign Over Me was me experimenting with what if a sort of swung reggae approach to fun and a rhythmic approach to fun, and it so worked. And I forget whether I think Dexter was after that, but I'd sort of learned this thing that if you go there's a juice to that, and there's a sort of skip to that, which is really fun. So I think the Dexter was also influenced by my what I consider my own discoveries or explorations in the score to Reign Over Me.
Wow, cool.
Question is for David. I know I learned a lot about Jim Henson from watching the film. A lot of stuff that I didn't know. And so I just am wondering what you
Yeah, definitely. There were two major things that were surprising. One was his wife's involvement, especially early on in his creative output. Like, I had no idea that they were basically equal partners in coming up with the Muppets. Maybe he was a bit more of the lead, but she was very involved, and she even scouted a lot of the puppeteers and found I think they found Frank Oz together, and so that was one aspect, her involvement. But the other one was really how much at his heart he was really an experimental filmmaker, and you can see that in some of the shorts that they show that he made, and which were particularly inspiring for me doing the score, because they have this kinetic kind of offbeat rhythm to them. I mean, in fact, we talked about Sesame Street before. He really didn't want to do Sesame Street when they came to him with that. He didn't want to do children's television. He wanted to create a chain of psychedelic nightclubs, and it was like, which one? And he ended up choosing Sesame Street, thank God. But it was interesting just to see that that's where his mind was going, and where he sort of saw his own artistic output, where he was pulled. And once you see that, you can see it pop up everywhere. Like in Sesame Street, for instance, all those little animations, claymation, the sort of stop motion. That was like, that's what they sort of bartered with him to do. It was like, you can make these strange experimental films in the middle of children's television, and when you watch them from that, obviously I remember them, and when I was a kid, they were just, that's what Sesame Street was. But now when you watch them from that, with that lens, you're like, these are totally crazy and trippy, and he was just going for it. So I think that he created so many things that were sort of warm and cuddly and touched everyone so deeply that you can forget that he had like a bit of an edge to the things he made, and it's definitely what we all tried to keep in mind making the film is remember who he was. If all of the industry of Jim Henson was gone, that he had this experimental filmmaker spirit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to break my own rule, and I'm going to ask each of you a question. It's something I love to ask at all of these. What's it like for you to have fans, David?
I'm still not sure I do, although my son, though, my son and Daniel may be the only people I know in my life who appreciate the score for Damsel. And he's not interested in the fact that I did it, but that it somehow involves a dragon, so he asked for dragon music. So I know I have one fan, and that's pretty cool. Yeah.
John, what's it like for you?
Well, it makes my wife laugh. I had to take a picture to prove this event is actually happening. So maybe we can all get on FaceTime with her at the end. Something. But no, I'm actually was just having a moment here, feeling really grateful to be part of culture. In other words, that we're creating, and we've all had. I mean, we all participated in it. That more than being fans, that in a sense, I think a lot of the stories that we get to be a part of are to culture what dreaming is to the individual. Do you see what I mean? In other words, that we create these. And you were just talking about Jim Henson. I felt so moved thinking about those really wild, psychedelic, trippy little shorts that are in there, and how this really does. It does create what we are in the good, the bad, and the ugly of it, and hopefully it gets better from here because it's getting pretty ugly. And I think that that's the most important thing about fans is that without fans and without us, that it's that co-creation of humanness, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Ralph, what do you think?
Well, I'm completely unaware of the idea of fans for film. I mean, put it this way, you know, it's not like we're walking through crowds of adoring people on a regular basis. So I enjoy I enjoy it when people send emails, either appreciating or asking questions, and that's really it. That's my experience of the interface. But sort of riffing off what John just said, actually meeting up with fellow composers or anybody who really gets and understands and is interested in what we do, and talking about and sharing the common experiences we have of weeping in corridors outside studios and all those moments of just being thrilled and having things soar. But it's really the idea of belonging to a community, which is a tricky one because we're cottage industry people. We have our loom at home and we do our own looming. So to feel like we're part of something larger is actually thrilling when it happens, but it's very rare.
Yeah. I mean, my experience, you can echo all three of what's just been said. I work on a lot of projects that have wild fan bases, with Daredevil and a lot of the Marvel stuff and the video game world. I mean, these are your people that are very active, super active fan bases. I mean, the Planet of the Apes people. I mean, it's so you are. But again, like Rolf was saying, and everyone else, we are so isolated the way we work. We aren't. At least me personally. I mean, a lot of composers, we're not generally out there. I mean, I think now we're really starting to see composers be more outwardly with all the concerts and the live music and the shows, and it's becoming way more of a not as isolated as it used to be, but I still work pretty isolated. I mean, I'm not huge on social media. So when you do events like this, you kind of walk into something, and I feel like I should be sitting out here with the fans asking questions, because I still picture myself as a fan, and it's sometimes I lose focus every now and then and go, geez, I guess I have worked on some things that are reaching people, and it's always a good feeling to kind of have that, and then it immediately goes away, and my wife tells me to go and feed the pig. So yeah, it's very short-lived little moments where I come home and I have that moment, and I puff my chest out and say, is Hans Zimmer feeding a pig? I don't have to feed the pig. So we have horses and pigs and rabbits and lizards, and we have a lot of animals. So that's not just coming from anywhere. So, but it is. It's a warm feeling that you do. And I remember, it's like I said, 10 years ago I'd be sitting in the audience. So it's an odd thing when it does happen, but I do appreciate it, and it's fun when it happens.
Tom.
Well, I've had a recording career. I did my first solo album at the age of 20, and so I've had a fan base for a while. And I must tell you, it's always gratifying to know that your music extends just beyond your own efforts. And some people refer to me as an artist. If they want to say that about me, that's fine. But I don't want to call myself an artist. What I am is a really, really good craftsman. And I pride myself on that, and I've always strived for excellence. And I think fans understand that you're giving your best, and if they want to call it art or just music they like, every now and then I get one of these letters which just chokes me up, which is, Mr. Scott, I was terribly sick in the hospital for 6 months with such and such and such, and your music helped me get through it. And I'm like, how lucky am I that anything I've done has brought comfort to anybody. So that's a real blessing as far as I'm concerned, having fans of any kind.
Thank you. Question? Question, anyone? You sir?
Thank you. And by the way, thank you for the pizzicato comedy comment. Is that an industry standard?
Oh yeah.
So my question's for everybody.
You can make it for one composer, sir. Okay. Sorry.
So, and it kind of comes along from what Tom said about listening to the Rite of Spring. In that world, Stravinsky had a bunch of rehearsals. It was a huge, complex orchestration. He had chances to fine-tune it, I presume. I don't know for sure. But what amazes me about and there's, many tens of thousands of dollars sitting there, and the orchestration or the arranging, if it's less than full orchestra, has to be perfect. And and we're in a recording studio.
Yep, your question, though.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The question is, in terms of you recording for large orchestra, and there's really no going back or rehearsal time, any comments about how that works out? Any anecdotes about maybe the time you had to change something? It's about that high pressure of recording for a large group for the first time.
Let's give that to you, John.
Faizana or Faizana?
I'll go for you. I'm sorry.
It's a great question. I think the one thing that helps us as much as it hurts us today, you see a theme with me. 30 years ago, it was way more of a pressure cooker than it used to be, at least in my experience. Now we do mock-ups. So by the time this music is approved and ready to go to orchestration and ready to go to the stage, the studio's heard a lot of stuff. They understand what they're what they're going to get, and there's not a ton of deviation from that mock-up to what we end up with on the final. There's changes that happen, but 30 years ago it was a pressure cooker. I mean, the director, you see these old videos of probably 40 years. You see these videos of Williams and Spielberg and Williams sitting at the piano. Well, here's what the theme's going to sound like, and then they would say, oh, I can't wait till we hear it on the day, and then you would go to the day, and that's like you said, it was the world premiere. If a director came in my studio and I sat at the piano and played him themes, he would say, oh, this is incredible. And then he would leave, and then I'd get a call from my agent being like, you're fired. like that's too big of a risk these days for studios. They want to, at least in my experience, I mean, it's different for everybody. They want to hear mock-ups. There's no such thing as a demo anymore. So we use computers now, and we have a lot of tools at our fingertips to give them a general idea so they can, and it's honestly 90% of it is just in the interest of everyone feeling safe and secure and comfortable that when they go and spend that money on the stage, it's going to be money well spent and they don't waste. That's become a big thing. And so some of the pressure because of that mock-up process has been relieved a little bit off of us. Not to say it's still not a pressure situation, because things do arise on a scoring stage that you kind of have to deal with in real time, but nowhere near what you hear great stories of James Horner recording Alien, and he showed up at, you may have seen the videos on YouTube where he shows up at Abbey Road and some of the stuff wasn't working, and the director threw out the first reel, and he's in the back room writing, and players are sitting out there on stands, and
Right.
they're getting, those days, they make sure, I think because of experiences like that, they make sure that doesn't happen as much as it used to happen. So technology is kind of, as much as technology, I feel, has hurt the scoring process, it's also helped the scoring process, and it's also relieved some pressure off of composers to be able to show up at that stage with giant surprises happening. That's been my experience. I mean, it's a very, recording sessions and production, and it's very personal, and it swings wildly from composer to composer, so I can only kind of speak to my experiences with it, and I really do like, as big of a pain in the ass developing these mock-ups are and how they aren't completely musical and you're very limited to what you can do with them and without, they are a tool to kind of get to that next stage. There's plenty of times where I write a piece of music and I say, here's what I want to do with my flutes. It's going to sound like shit in the mock-up, but I'm going to write what feels good that's going to get past the studio so they can kind of have a general understanding of what it's going to sound like. And then when it goes to orchestration, I give it to my orchestrator. I say, hey, Pete, do me, this is what I did in the mock-up, but here's what I really want to happen with the flutes so the players can So you kind of have to play this game. Getting a film from the beginning stages to the stage is littered with stages you have to kind of get through. And as time's gone on, the stages have kind of gone more than we would like. But my stage process is a lot different than Rolf's, is a lot different than John Williams, is a lot different than Hans Zimmer's. So everybody kind of has to figure out how they're going to get that score from the start to the end. And the process is I think it's actually really fascinating how wildly it can swing from composer to composer.
Well, we've got time for one more question, and I'm going to give it to Tom Scott.
I just want to ask the panel, how many of y'all have had a score thrown out?
I'm going to give this to one of you guys. Who's the brave one?
How many of you had 2 scores thrown out?
I've had 2 scores on the same movie.
John, I'm going to give you the last one. Tell us about this. What happened?
Oh God, it's like PTSD. No, it was the movie The Lincoln Lawyer. I got fired 3 times. I did. I got hired, fired, hired, fired, hired, fired. But it was no. I think that's part of what we do is we're out there on the front lines, right? You know, and it's a weird feeling, and I'm sure we've all go through it. This weird anxiety that you kind of love and hate, and it's like walking a tightrope. And I ask myself, why do I do this? And I guess because I can't do anything else. You know, I don't think anyone will pay me to fish. And I don't. So yeah, it's. I don't know. I think it'd be really cool if we have a minute to hear from other people, because I think that's really. It's a weird driving force of the creativity. Is that the weird relationship with fear? I'm going to get a little esoteric and say maybe because we live in this very sterile, strange disconnect from nature, maybe this is a replacement for the actual fear of being prey. I don't know. I'm going to throw it out there, my anthropological perspective on it.
May I tell a story, please? My first rejected score, and by the way, may I say that to be in the club of composers who've had a score thrown out is a very exclusive club with all the best composers in throughout history. There's a whole book actually called Rejected Film Scores. Fantastic. So I wrote the music, or was hired to write the music for an original movie, back in '82 or '83, a movie called Neighbors, which starred my Blues Brothers buddies, John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, directed by a guy named John Avildsen, who had directed all the Rocky films, produced by one of the most successful pairings of producers in that, David Brown and Richard Zanuck, who had produced Jaws and The Sting and other things. And I thought they were great, classy guys. John Belushi had, I think, basically just annoyed the director enough into hiring me. Because although I did have a history, but he liked his friend Bill Conti, of course, because they had had such great success together. Anyway, so I wrote this score, and Neighbors was not a very good movie. First of all, John Belushi insisted on being the straight. There's a straight couple and a weird couple. John insisted on, we'll go against type this time, and I'll play the straight couple, and Dan with his wife, and Dan Aykroyd will play the weird one. That was a poor choice to begin with, but in the end, it just wasn't all that funny. And correctly, because it's sort of a mystery, we don't know what's going on. And Avildsen says to me, quite correctly, play the drama. Let the comedy just play off to the side, you know. So I did. I wrote a score that I'm still very proud of. And they previewed the movie, and the preview cards came back saying, "Gee, we were expecting another Animal House, Blues Brothers, Belushi, Aykroyd romp." Which the movie wasn't ever, it couldn't ever be. So a couple days later, I get a call from Richard Zanuck, and he says, "Tom, we want to meet with you." And I went in there to meet with him, and he says, "Look, we love the score you did. If it were up to me, I'd keep it in. But the studio insists we do something to try and, up the comedy. So what we'd like you to do is, instead of the 55-piece orchestra, use a 16, 17-piece like it's a Bugs Bunny cartoon with a lot of wah, wah, wah." And I must have been noticeably unenthusiastic about the prospect. So a couple of days later, I got the call from Dick Barris, who was the head of Columbia Music at that time. He says, "Tom, Avildsen decided to go ahead and get his friend, Bill Conti, to do it." So fine. So I forgot about the movie. The movie came and went, and but about a week or so after the premiere of it, there was a review in Time magazine, or one of them, Newsweek, I guess. And the guy said, "Well, this movie isn't very, it wasn't very funny for a number of reasons, but it does contain perhaps the most offensive score ever written." And that's no fault of Bill Conti's. And I like Bill. He's a great guy, and he did exactly what he was told to do. But you know what? If there's a rule about music and comedy, making music funny will never make comedy funnier, unless it's a Bugs Bunny cartoon, perhaps. But But if you're trying to make a movie funny, no music you can possibly add will make it funny, and that was true then, and it's still true today.
Well, there you go, Tom. Thank you. Well, and you can get both scores on Varese Saraband. That is our panel, and I'm looking forward to having you all for our 30th. Let's give a big thanks to David Fleming, John Frizzell, Ralph Kent, John Paisano, and Tom Scott. We're going to take a break for just a few minutes, and then we'll have our album and poster signing. Thank you so much, everyone.
That's it? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. All right. Sure.
Thank you.
If you have CDs